Hello, hi, thank you so much for being here. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends. Welcome to the ACM. I am Naomi Wang. I'm a curator for Southeast Asia here, and I will be your MC for today. I would like to welcome you to today's talk by Dr. Alexandra Green from the British Museum entitled Illuminating Artefacts from Java to Myanmar. Alexandra Green is the S.P. Shaw Curator for Southeast Asia in the Departments of Asia and Money and Medals at the British Museum. Her recent publications include Burma to Myanmar in 2023, Southeast Asia, A History in Objects, also in the same year, 2023, and Burmese Silver from the Colonial period in 2022. So without further ado, we may welcome Alex so that she can present her talk for today.
Thank you very much, Naomi. So I hope everybody can hear me okay. Please do shout out if I'm not being clear enough. So anyway, I wanted to thank lots of people, actually, but thank you so much for inviting me to speak here. So thanks are due, of course, to the Asian Civilisations Museum, to Clement On, director of the ACM, also to Naomi, curator for Southeast Asia, and of course, Priscilla Shaw. So I'm very, very pleased to be back. I haven't been in Singapore since 2019, so it's a real pleasure to be here. One of the things I want to talk about today is the concept of museums as collaborative spaces. Museums are collaborative, and I also want to think about how objects are really important for those collaborations, and I really want to put objects at the heart of things. So that leads to the point that although I'm the speaker standing up here, there are actually many, many people who've contributed to the research that I'm talking about this evening. It's not just me. So I'm talking about two particular projects. One was the Burma to Myanmar exhibition that we had at the British Museum from November 2023 till February 2024. And that, again, I came up with the basic concept, but then I had a Burmese intern. We had a UK Burmese community group that we worked with, and I've worked with contemporary artists in Myanmar as well, the British Council in Myanmar, and so forth. So again, a very collaborative project. With the other project that I'm talking about this evening, it's an ongoing research project looking at the collection of Javanese theatrical materials that we have at the British Museum. And I'm particularly right now working with two academics from Gajah Mada University, Rudy Wiratama and Bhima Raharja. Some of you may know them. And also Dr. Roger Vetter, who is Professor Emeritus at Grinnell College and has focused on Jogjakarta court gamelan instruments for the past 40 years. So again, I'm the person standing up here presenting, but actually I am presenting collaborative joint work. It's not my own. So without further ado, I want to say that objects lead interesting lives. They are made, they are owned, they have roles in exchange, they have roles in prestige. Some arrive in museums, as you know, we're standing in a wonderful museum here. They become displays, they're used for research, they become political objects. They have many, many, many different roles throughout their lives, from before they are made to where they end up today. So the spur for this talk really arises from actually yet another research paper that I'm working on, thinking about the importance of art history methodologies. Don't worry, I'm not getting into all that theory tonight. But one of the things is, in the 19th century, people really focused on looking at objects for the style, and they tried to come up with these sort of chronological stylistic developments. And yes, that's important, but where does it take us? So through lots of twists and turns, by the late 20th century, we've ended up with a real emphasis on theory. And when you read a lot of these theoretical papers, suddenly you're just like, well, where is actually the object? And with that sidelining objects, I feel like we're slowly starting to come out of that. And so one of the things I want to do tonight is to move beyond either simple chronology and theoretical conceptions. I want to return to a focus on the object itself. So in this talk, I'm going to explore the ways in which objects contribute to an understanding of the world around us, how they both uncover and shape history. I think of objects as not only being reflections, receiving influences, but also as actors. They have agency, they impact the way we think, the way we do things. And so, as I said, I'm going to focus on 2 case studies, which give us a sense from 2 different directions, the ways that you can use objects. So, as I said, the first is the Burma to Myanmar exhibition, and the second is about these Javanese theatrical collections. So both of these case studies provide us with very different ways to come at objects and reveal the power and the roles that objects play in the world around us. So first, Burma to Myanmar. So Burma to Myanmar was really a landmark exhibition in exploring Myanmar's long histories through the lens of cross-cultural interactions. So this exhibition, I conceived of it as how do we explore a country that had a border drawn around it in 1948, which is composed of many, many different historical cultures. It was home to different kingdoms. It was home to empires, principalities, chiefdoms, complex kinship networks. And that actually, until independence in 1948, they had never, ever been a single political entity. So I wanted to explore that, but I wanted, obviously, to explore that through art and culture. And so every single object in the exhibition was chosen very specifically to explore the history of Myanmar, but through the lens of these cross-cultural interactions, as I said. So it really was an exercise in addressing the multiplicity and diversity of modern Myanmar's history. I wanted to produce an integrative account, one that did not make communities into minorities. Obviously, in any given locale, communities are not necessarily minorities unless they've been incorporated into some larger group. I also didn't want to promote the majority view. So I didn't want a view of Myanmar from the central Burmese viewpoint. So we structured the exhibition into 4 sections, and we started by looking at natural resources, because I think people tend to think of Myanmar as a very poor country, and indeed most of its people are extremely poor, but it is actually a very wealthy country in terms of resources, even if those resources are very poorly distributed. We also looked then at 5 different sections of what is today Myanmar. So we looked at the central section, we looked at the western part, the eastern, lower Myanmar, and then of course the highland region. And then we turned to British colonial times, the colonial takeover, and then finally we looked at the post-independence period coming right up to the coup in 2021. I really wanted the exhibition to be extremely layered, so you'll notice from the slides that I'm going to show that we were very concerned about provenance of objects, because that's another form of cross-cultural interaction, obviously, or just interactions between humans. So we provided as full a provenance as possible on all the labels. And I was thrilled that the British Museum agreed to that, because oftentimes we have very strict word numbers on labels, and they agreed to be flexible. Another part of the exhibition was that we were going to borrow primarily from UK institutions to show the strong connection between Britain and Burma during colonial times. And this was the plan even before COVID and before the coup, so it wasn't something that happened because of subsequent events. I had, of course, planned to borrow from Myanmar. I had gone to Myanmar in February 2020, and I talked to all sorts of museums and museum directors and the Department of Archaeology and the relevant ministries, and then, of course, came the coup, and so that all became impossible, very sadly. So what I want to do is just show you a few slides and talk about some of the ways that we thought about objects in the exhibition. I was thrilled to have this. This is a golden letter set with 24 Burmese rubies written by King Alaungpea, who ruled from 1752 to 1760. He was founder of the last Burmese dynasty, the Kombang dynasty, and he sent this letter to King George II of Great Britain in 1756. And it was, if you look on Wikipedia, it's talked about as a trade agreement. It's definitely not a trade agreement. It's very much a head of state introducing himself directly to another head of state as between equals. But the letter reveals many, many more things to us besides what's actually written on it. It shows us the rubies. It shows us the rubies and the gold show us the wealth of the Central Burmese Kingdom at the time. It talks about also the Burmese Empire. Again, people tend to think of the British Empire, but we don't think so much about other empires. The Burmese had a very major empire. Certainly by the late 18th century, they were extremely powerful indeed. So there are many, many things that we can draw out of this letter. And anyway, as I said, it's a UNESCO World Heritage object, and it's the first time it's been out of the library in Germany since the 1750s, so that was fantastic. Unfortunately, the reason it's in a library in Germany is of a quirk of British history in that the Georgian period, the King George I and George II, of course, were German, spoke German as their first language, and George still had his library in Hanover, so he received the letter. He did never bother to respond, of course, and he sent it off to his library. So we started the exhibition by looking at these different types of materials, again, through that lens of cross-cultural engagement. Then we moved on to dividing the country up into those 5 sections, and we looked at different kingdoms. People, I think, tend to assume that you have a line drawn around it at some point. It's a modern nation state with borders, that somehow it's always been like that. But of course, Myanmar has not. So this is a coin from the kingdom of Arakan, which is partially today's Rakhine state, but of course the kingdom of Arakan extended down into parts of what is today Lower Myanmar and up into what is today Bangladesh. And it was a major trading nation and was actually very powerful. And between the 1580s and 1635, Arakan's kings minted coins with inscriptions in 3 languages. So you have Bengali, Persian, and Arabic script, and Arakanese on this coin. And so, of course, the use of these languages together expresses, the text is all the same, expressing the king's power and sovereignty, but what it does show us is the importance of trade, the importance of communicating between lots of different peoples who are not necessarily all speaking the same language or all coming from the same places. What's also interesting about this coin is that it was issued by a king called Dharmaraja Hussain. And Dharmaraja, of course, means a righteous king, connected with Buddhism. Hussain, obviously, is a Muslim name. So we see already that Arakan is a diverse and a space with a diverse population from early times. You know, unlike today's claims that it has not, that the Muslims have moved in recently. Clearly, this sorts of material shows us that that's not the case. And I'm sorry, this really is kind of a whiz tour through the exhibition. There is a book, so if anybody's interested, please do get the book. Then we looked at Lower Myanmar, the kingdom, focusing specifically on the kingdom of Bago, and Bago became very, very wealthy because it's on the sea, and like Arakan, it was a major trading kingdom. And because of its location, it received lots of goods coming up across the Bay of Bengal. It then also, because of its location on trade routes, received goods coming from down from China and the Shan states and northern Thailand. So you had all these goods coming across Bengal and up through Bago and then dispersed inland, and you had all these inland goods coming down and then were dispersed out over the sea from Bago. So the kingdom became fabulously wealthy. So it handled products from gems, teak, sugar, cotton, rice, cloth. And by the 1500s, Bago's trade networks had extended to Europe as well as Japan. And it's particularly well known for these sturdy ceramic jars that were produced. They were produced primarily at Martaban, Motama today, and Twante near Yangon. And we know that these were very popular on a wide range of ships from a very early date. So we have a Moroccan trader who was in the area in 1350, and he talked about the popularity of these. Of course, they're also found in many parts of Southeast Asia. For example, in Borneo, many communities use these as heirloom jars, and they're also used as currency. So we can see that something produced for use in one place takes on different lives as it moves around, and they were popular for centuries. So it was a very powerful kingdom. And of course, it had a lot of back and forth with central Myanmar, which came down and conquered it a few times. But of course, Bago went north also and conquered central Myanmar. So moving populations around, and I will come back to that in a little bit. This was a fabulous map. And I did have a wonderful time traveling all over the UK and seeing many parts of the UK that I had never been to before in looking for objects and collections. And there are many, many Burmese objects in UK collections, both private and institutional. Anyway, this is a wonderful map that I found at the Cambridge Library. We think it may have been commissioned by James Scott, of course, who was assistant commissioner of the Shan states during the colonial times. But I included it because one of the things that's very important to know about mainland Southeast Asia is that prior to the 19th century, borders were not particularly important. They were fluid. There was a different conception of political power. It was not so territorial. It was really about how far did your influence extend, who paid you tribute. And similarly, Southeast Asia has historically been underpopulated. So when you marched into somebody else's kingdom, you weren't so interested in seizing their land. You had plenty of land, but you didn't have people to work that land. So a lot of warfare in mainland Southeast Asia was about scooping people up and bringing them back to your area so that they would work and pay taxes to you as opposed to paying taxes to the king over there. So one of the things that happened during the colonial period is that you started getting these lines being drawn. And this is a 47-kilometer section of the Shuili River in what is today northern Shan state. And it shows two of the Shan states. So the Shan states were actually smaller kingdoms, principalities, if you would like to call them that waxed and waned as they controlled the wonderful resources that you get in the Shan states. And this particular map shows three different states. So the yellow one is Mong Mao, the red one is Nam Kam, and the black up in the corner there is Ceylon. So Ceylon was a tributary of Nam Kam, and the green spots are villages. And it's actually, apparently, I haven't been myself, so I can't say, but apparently it was quite accurate at the time of its production for where the villages were located in relationship to the river and as part of the kingdom. And, the kingdoms. So when the British and Chinese started talking about a hard border, then Mong Mao became part of what is today Yunnan province, and Nam Kam and Ceylon remained as part of Myanmar. We then also looked at the highland regions, and obviously it's not really possible to to talk about all the different ethnic groups that are found in Myanmar. Myanmar is one of the most diverse countries in the world. So we focused on groups that were particularly well represented in UK collections. And of course, the Kachin are very well. They have lovely textiles, so there are lots and lots of textiles in UK collections. And I was able to conclude this photograph of the Kachin chief Ngalangla. He was a very smart man. He was an extremely powerful chief. And we did these tests with audiences before the exhibition. This is sort of standard procedure for the British Museum. And because he's wearing a Chinese robe, he's smoking a pipe associated with the Shan states, although it was used across the region. He's wearing a Chinese and a Kachin turbans on his head. And he's wearing, you can't see it very clearly here, but he's wearing a Burmese skirt cloth, a Burmese longi. And everybody's immediate assumption was that he obviously was poor because he's had to cobble together all these different items. But of course, he's not, having to cobble together these things. He's actually showing the extent of his power, because intercultural knowledge and the ability to negotiate across different cultures was very important in a region where there were so many different groups. It was crucial to success in Highland communities. And of course, these Highland communities were very powerful in being the middlemen, as it were, between diplomatic exchanges between the Burmese court and the Chinese court, and also in trade. So this is a very powerful person indicating the extent of his diplomatic connections, not, as I said, the other way around. So we looked again at the role of material culture in power constructions. And then, of course, there's central Myanmar. And because everybody focuses on central Myanmar when we're talking about the country, then there was so much material. So I decided to focus on a particular event, which was the 1767 sack of Ayutthaya, when Burmese armies marched into Thailand, sacked the kingdom, and brought back tens of thousands of people and resettled them in the Burmese heartland. So people tend to think of this sort of forced relocation in terms of American-style plantation slavery. That's not the case. Oftentimes, if you were a silversmith in one place, you were relocated. If you survived the relocation, this is not obviously a nice process. If you survived that relocation, then you could be a silversmith in the new place. So one of the things that happened is that the Thai theatrical troops were scooped up and brought back, and they absolutely took the Burmese court by storm. They became incredibly popular. And the result was, although the Burmese knew about the Ramayana epic beforehand, suddenly it just became phenomenally popular, and there were theatrical troops springing up, showing it. It started being produced in textile hangings like this one. And of course, the clothing that the theatrical performers wore then became reinterpreted as a new form of Burmese formal court dress as well. And you can see that here, where you've got Hanuman and this huge swag that he's wearing, and then this cloud collar, and then these sort of epaulets, not really epaulets, but these extra pieces on his costume. Those were all new interpretations of these Thai costumes that were then became part of this formal court dress. Then we turn to the colonial period, and we had many different parts to this section where we looked at things like changes to religion, we looked at technological changes, we looked at stylistic changes. So obviously I can't go into that, but one of the things that's of particular interest was this very large Buddha image. You can see it's almost 2 meters high. It was collected during the first Anglo-Burmese War because, of course, Burma was taken over in 3 phases, 1820s, 1850s, and then the 80s. After the First War, particularly, there was a great deal of looting, and a Captain Marriott came back with nearly, I think it was 173 objects. He offered them to the British Museum. We ended up with 2, but he wanted to be made a trustee, and he was too, the theory goes that he was too low class, so we said no. So what has happened, but because of that, we do not know what has happened to the rest of his collection, which is obviously a terrible shame. But one of the things that's interesting about this object is that we don't have any idea how he acquired it, but we do know that it was fairly, by looking at the object itself, we do know that it's of a type that was produced in central Myanmar, oftentimes for export to the Shan states. And we also know, because of the fillet, of the kind of the broad fillet around his brow here, and then also the fact that he's offering the viewer a myrabalan fruit, a medicinal fruit. From those 2 elements, we know that the image must have been fairly recently made, because these are elements of a style that then became popular over the course of the 19th century. Then we also obviously talked about changes to the way different ethnic groups were treated by the British. One of the things that happened is that, well, I should say, before the British colonial times, ethnicity was a very fluid concept. Depends on who your patron was. You could change. If you were working for them, you would dress one way, you'd eat one way, you'd talk one way. You were back home in your village, again, you would do different things. So it wasn't a fixed concept associated with territory the way it was in European minds. So one of the things that happened is, as the British came and they introduced the census. And of course, Burmese courts had censuses before, but what they collected was information for tax and mobilization purposes. The British now were collecting everything. You had to say, I am Karen, I am Kachin. You couldn't say, I am Karen and Kachin. You had to be one or the other. And they did this for all sorts of categories, not just ethnicity. You couldn't say you're a carpenter and somebody who sold things in the market. You had to be just one thing. So we ended up with these sort of pigeonholing categories. And one of the ways that was done was also through analysis of clothing. But when we start then looking at these clothing collections that have ended up in the UK, we find that there's so much more that we can do with them. So one of the things that we did do for this exhibition was we did a research project in that we looked at the different fibers and dyes that were used in Karen textiles produced over the course of the 19th century, and looked at them for the advent of synthetic dyes and fibers. And this piece ended up being super interesting in that it has European synthetic red wool felt. The yellow that you probably can't see very well here, again, is made as a synthetic dye, but then the rest was made with natural dyes. So we started getting a very complex and interesting picture about the way synthetics were taken up. And then, as I said, the exhibition came up right to present day times, and I acquired some contemporary art from artists, partially for the exhibition, but also partially to kind of record what's happening in Myanmar today. And this is a fabulous serpent. It's nearly 2 meters long. It's gorgeous. Produced by an artist named So Yu Nui. And what's interesting about it is it shows us multiple themes. She's a Chinese Burmese artist, and she also was born in the year of the snake, like this year. And but pythons in Burmese culture, particularly in Burmese Buddhism, are very important. So she felt that this combined the Chinese and the Burmese sides of her identity, but it was actually made at the Jingdezhen kilns in China in 2018. And of course, because of that relatively open decade that Myanmar had, artists were able to go out and work with other artistic communities. And so it's a record of that. And of course, that is essentially not possible anymore. So the exhibition ended with images projected onto the sides of buildings to protest the coup. But again, in terms of sort of these cross-cultural interactions, many of the images show people using the three-fingered salute that you can find across Asia. So that's talking about the Burma to Myanmar exhibition. I felt it worked very well in terms of not prioritizing any specific voice. Obviously, it was a very fast trot through Burmese history, but I think it started a process by which we can think about a complex cultural space and ways in which we can address that. Then, second half of my talk is basically about Javanese theater. Sorry, give me one moment, please. So the second example is basically, it's an ongoing project. This is not finished by any stretch of the imagination. I also want to make the disclaimer that I am not a Javanese theater specialist, and the research I'm presenting here is absolutely collaborative with Pak Bima and Pak Rudy and Roger Vetter that I mentioned earlier. So the four of us are putting together an article. We're working on that together. I received a grant to bring them over to look at the collections. So actually last March, we spent a very intensive 3 weeks looking at every single shadow puppet in the Raffles collection, all the gamelan instruments. We also went up to Claydon House in Buckinghamshire, where there is another gamelan, a group of gamelan instruments collected by Raffles. So it was a very intensive collaborative period of research. It was really fantastic. Anyway, so just to give you a little bit of background, the British Museum holds more than 360 shadow puppets, 44 wayang-klitik, which are flat wooden puppets. We have 46 wayang krucil gilig, which are wooden puppets carved in the round. We have more than 100 masks, and we have 21 full-sized gamelan instruments. And of course, we just looked at this collection with the Raffles exhibition that was here at the ACM in 2019, and then part of which traveled to the British Museum and was held there as well. But the assumption has been that this collection was taken from the Yogyakarta court when Raffles ordered the British to attack it in 1812, at which time the court was looted quite severely. And so I talked in my article in the Raffles exhibition book, beautifully published by the ACM in 2019, I explored the idea behind Raffles forming his collections. So he not only had the theatrical material, but he also had images and sculptures from the Hindu-Buddhist part of Java as well. So I don't have time to go over that again. If anybody's particularly interested, either get the book or go to the library, or if you email me, I'm happy to send you my essay. I have a PDF of it. But one of the things we're doing now is we are moving beyond looking at this collection as a collection. We're moving beyond Raffles. We are looking at we're looking at each object in detail, and we're ambitiously using the puppets to revise the development of shadow puppet theater in the 18th century on Java. Because Raffles left Java in 1816, we know that none of these objects can have been produced after that time. So it provides us a fabulous terminal point with which to then compare later productions and also remaining collections on Java that we think were produced earlier. By comparing with them as well, we can get a really good sense of how the carving styles, the coloring styles, and Javanese theater in general developed. So again, I have a few examples to show you. So we have the masks, and these probably are actually the least interesting part of Raffles' collection. They turn out to be new. We can tell from the insides of the masks, you can see the bite cords, so masks are held to the face by this cord that you would hold in your mouth. None of the bite cords have been bitten. In addition, obviously, Indonesia is hot, so the performer would sweat. There are no indications of any sweat. None of these masks has been used. They were also produced in a couple of different workshops. So you can see that some of the masks have painted hair with gold leaf, and then others have carved hair. And although the faces of the masks are really quite beautifully carved, actually the hair is quite crudely carved. So it seems likely that they were probably produced pretty quickly for Raffles. That we don't know whether he purchased them or they were given to him, but it's pretty clear that they were produced. They were not taken from the court. That he acquired them in some other way. One of the things that we are doing, besides identifying these different workshops, is that you can see that there are labels inside the masks. So there's a label identifying the character in Javanese, and then a label identifying, saying the same thing effectively in English. What I've noticed amusingly, and what we have to work with the scientific research department, is because actually the Javanese ink has lasted. It's still beautiful and black. The European ink has faded extremely badly. And we haven't yet started it, but we're going to be using, sort of, I'm not a scientist, so infrared or something to enable us to read the English writing. Then we also have something that has now been termed Wayang Krucil Gilig, which are these three-dimensional puppets, of which the British Museum holds the world's largest collection, and actually I believe the world's only collection. These are really very strange puppets. And you're thinking, well, are they really puppets? But yes, actually they are. So they would have had a rod coming out the bottom, but at some point somebody sawed those off. I suspect probably Raffles to enable them to stand, but we don't know. There's no record. And of course, the puppets would also once have had rods, so you could move the arms. So there's no mention of these in Raffles' History of Java, which he wrote and published in 1817. So there was a Javanese encyclopedia called Serat Centini, which was produced around 1814. It also does not mention this type of puppet, though it does mention wayang golek, which of course are three-dimensional, but the clothing is not carved, it's actual clothing. The dress that we find on these puppets shows that whoever did the carving or whoever commissioned them had a good knowledge of Central Javanese courtly etiquette. The batik motifs, for example, are applied correctly according to rank. The kris are worn in an appropriate manner. Yet on some characters, such as Sabda Palon here, the clothing resembles that found on shadow puppets produced from the North Coast, particularly Cirebon. So all we can say is that the person who commissioned these or who made these was definitely a high-ranking courtier, familiar with both Central and North Coast, the Central region and the North Coast culturally. So it might possibly have been the regent of Semarang, Sura Adimangala, who the fifth, and he, of course, played an important role in helping Raffles study Javanese culture, so possibly they came from him. So again, there are no other puppets like these, except possibly for one or two in the US. So it seems likely that they were made specifically for Raffles. And again, in our paper, we go into more detail. I can't do that, given the amount of time I have tonight. We also have 44 wayang klitik puppets. So these puppets, of course, are still used in Java today, though they're much less popular than the shadow puppets. They're performed during the day. We do know that there are some examples in Vienna that date to the early 17th century, but none of the puppets in the Raffles collection is that early. They display a mix of different styles, so again, they have some connections with today's Eastern Javanese wayang klitik. in coloration with these luxuriously gilded bodies and detailed motifs. They resemble Chirabone-style shadow puppets. And what's interesting, and again, you'll see that the rods have been cut off. They used to have longer rods. But what's also interesting about this collection is that they're entirely composed of characters and figures that are used for the Damarwulan stories. They're not used for there are no characters for other narratives, such as the Menak tales, which is the Persian stories of Amir Hamza. There are no characters for the Babads that tell of local history. And we do know from Raffles' writing that he associated the different types of puppet theater on Java with different periods of Javanese history. And he, of course, was particularly interested in history. So it might be that this group of puppets was then specially selected to link with his interest in history. Many of the puppets appear to have been repainted and regilded, suggesting again that they were prepared for him. Although with their combination of features, again, we need a much further, more in-depth study. This combination of features could indicate that they were an early, now non-existent style of Wayang-Klitik. Again, sort of the studies are just beginning. So, we have all these complexities that we're finding in this body of material. The gamelan instruments are also particularly interesting. As I said, we have 21 full-size gamelan instruments at the British Museum. There are further 12 at Claydon House in Buckinghamshire. And I had always thought of the gamelan, the Raffles gamelan, as a set, But when I started working at the British Museum 13 years ago now, when I first got to see them, my immediate response was, this is not a set. You just look at them, and they look different. There's one that's painted blue with almost no carving. Then use, for example, the two I'm showing here. You can see that iconographically, they are completely different. This one has a Garuda, two Nagas. This is a composite creature built in a very different way. That's beyond them simply being different instruments. When Roger Vetter came and worked with me, obviously he's an ethnomusicologist. He knows a great deal more about tuning. So we went through and we tapped all the keys, and he was recording the pitches, and they are not tuned together. We don't know, of course, whether they were never in tune with each other or if the frequencies might have changed, but we suspect that they likely were never in tune. And at the Claydon House gamelan, some of the keys were clearly had been made in Europe and just stuck on for appearance purposes. The position of pegs that holds the instrument keys in place have been modified numerous times. And then as I said, just the way they look was very different. What seems to have happened is that somebody has pulled together different instruments and given them a nice lick of paint, so they all have the same coloration. And they're going to look the same to Raffles. If you don't know, you're like, oh yeah, that's one's red and black and gold, so it must be the same as that one, which is also red and black and gold. So it seems very unlikely that this was ever a functional group of instruments. They are bits and pieces made from here and there. And then we started looking very specifically at the instruments. So this gendare, for example, actually is not even playable. It's been put together incorrectly, and it's been put together in such a way that if you played it more than a couple of times, it would start to fall apart. It's not. So, for somebody who doesn't have an eye for these things, you're going to look at you just get an impression, and then you think, great. But if you know something about it, and certainly this would not have been a gamelan that was, that would have been used. The other thing is that actually these types of zoomorphic gamelans were not something that were used in Central Java. These mostly came from the North Coast. These were produced in the North Coast, Gresik, Surabaya, and also the island of Madura. Javanese, Yogyakarta court gamelans tend to have abstract motifs. So again, Very, very interesting. Sorry, and I see that I'm running out of time. And I do want to turn very quickly to the shadow puppets. So, of course, the shadow puppets are what people feel particularly strongly about today. Understandably, we have figured out that there are 4 primary groups of shadow puppets. So first, there are puppets that come from Cirebon. And of the 360 puppets, actually, it seems like quite a number are actually props for the Wayang shows, although they're classified as shadow puppets. Again, I don't have time to go into that. But of the remaining, about 100 were made in Cirebon. And one of the things that happened is we can tell by the shape of the puppet, but then also they have been gilded, they have been repainted, they have been completely doctored, obviously for somebody who had no idea what they were acquiring because they're done really badly. So you can see this image, of Arjuna, and all these details have simply been given a lick of gold leaf. You would not have that normally. And then the other thing that's happened is if you look at the way they've been re-gilded and repainted, it's really sloppy. No self-respecting puppeteer, who was wealthy enough would have accepted puppets done that poorly. We have then also identified a group of about 100 Wayang Gadog. Wayang Gadog are used to tell the Damarwulan and the Panji stories. They were not popular at the Jogjakarta court. But they were popular at the Surakarta court. And what we found from the Wayang Gadog is that actually all of the Wayang Gadog in the Raffles collection appears to be from the same set. They are related iconography, and they all have this unusual pointed end to the arm rods, which is not normal. It also seems to be that they come from a collection known as the Kiai Banjed, which was commissioned between 1720 and 1750 by Amangkurat IV and his son Pakubuwono II, rulers of Kartasura, before the court was moved to present-day Surakarta in 1745. So this was a really exciting find, that suddenly we have this body of puppets that are from the same set and were produced, we know, between 1720 and 1750. And Raffles had a good relationship or a friendly relationship with the Surakarta court. Then we have identified a very few puppets that seem to have come from the Jogjakarta court. There are about 100 puppets of Wayang Purwa, which is used to show the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. But as I said, we think there are 4, of which this is one that comes from Jogjakarta. So there were power struggles, obviously, between within the Kartasura court that caused a split, and you ended up with rival courts in Jogja and Surakarta, and cultural productions became a major site of contestation, and different styles developed. So one of the things that we're doing is we're now looking through these Wayang Purwa puppets to see which ones have elements of what became the Jogjakarta style and elements that became the Surakarta style. We're also reading the writing on the feet, and I'm on the feet of the puppets, and I'm working with the Mangkunagaran court in Surakarta to translate all of these. And this one was very exciting. It identifies the name of the person who commissioned it, and we figured out that that person died in 1733. So now we know that this puppet had to have been made before 1733. So we're getting some really exciting information here. And then just to give you a sense of, I'm almost done. Sorry, I know I've run over a little bit. But then just to give you a sense of how we're able to start looking at things, obviously the details are beyond me as a non-puppet specialist, but things like this. So the 2 eyes on a monkey puppet was something that you found before the Jogja Surakarta split, and it was something that was continued on into the Jogjakarta style. Surakarta split from that early 2-eyed look, and they started developing a single eye, more profiled look for monkeys and large characters. So we're starting to, again, be able to say where these different puppets were made and where they might have, what what courts they might have connected with. We are then also, we've been able to identify some specific carvers who have particular styles. So this one is produced by a carver named Cherma Pangrawit, and one of his main features is that you can see the legs of the character very clearly in the clothing. Other puppeteers, the legs were covered. So again, this is the type of analysis that we're doing. It's an ongoing project. We are still in the process of writing the article. We're talking about possibly doing a book. We will have to see what's possible. But one of the things that is happening for sure is that all this information that we're generating, we are putting online. So if you go to britishmuseum.org/collection and you were to put in Raffles or you were to put in Shadow Puppet and Java, you will come up with what we've got. And as I'm going through the collection with an Indonesian volunteer who is also doing her PhD at the University of Oxford, we are adding all this information in so you can see all the research that we're doing anywhere in the world as long as you have internet. So, in conclusion, I would like to say that although separate materially and culturally, I know these are two radically different case studies, I think that the artworks that I've talked about really demonstrate how important objects are to humans, from being commissioned, conceived, to production, to use, to acquisition, to removal, to installation in a museum, to continued use, to being objects of research. Objects themselves have multiple biographies. They're part of really complicated networks of interactions. Their physical realities provide windows into these entangled worlds. And so instead of looking at them separately for a specific purpose, I'm arguing very passionately for that we move and combine these things. We look at them art historically, we look at them historically, we look at them in terms of religious studies, we look at them in terms of anthropology, we look at them in terms of politics. Objects are political. And we need approaches to objects that bring together these various methodologies, these various ideas. Objects are complex. We cannot simplify them. And in other words, we need to collaborate in order to understand objects and how they reflect and influence the worlds around them. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Amazing object-focused lecture, really dealing with a really vast range of material from present-day Myanmar, or as we refer to Myanmar, all the way to Java. And I think one of the things that really struck me was this idea that ideas of ethnicity and borders were really fluid, and it really isn't just about these either or all or nothing concepts, and also this idea of also looking at categories, as you have exemplified through this very in-depth interdisciplinary study of Javanese material, but also looking at all the different biographical information that could come out with looking at objects and focusing on objects. So we don't really have a lot of time, but I wonder if we could open the floor to some questions from our audiences. I'm sure we will have many. Yes, so the lady in front, if we could have the mic passed to her.
Hello. Yes, I visited the Burma to Myanmar exhibition, which was lovely. Right. I wanted to ask about the Southeast Asia Gallery, because there was a distinct Southeast Asia Gallery at the British Museum, and after the renovation was 4 or 5 years ago, it's gone. So I just wanted to check, is the British Museum planning to have a permanent Southeast Asia Gallery in another location? And if not, then how are you going to display your Southeast Asia objects? Is it going to be through exhibitions, of these themes now and then, or what? Because you do have a good Southeast Asia collection.
Yes. So I should say that we have 33,000 objects from Southeast Asia at the British Museum. I am responsible for all of them. So I'm a little bit busy. It keeps me out of trouble. Yes, so your question is actually a very painful one. So the Southeast Asia came out of the galleries in 2015 as Neil McGregor was leaving the institution, and he said, the next director will come in and he will decide where to put the Southeast Asia Gallery. The next director came in and never decided. Yes, I won't say anything more than that. And then obviously we've had our various problems, and we had an interim director, 23, 24, and our new director just started last year. So I have tried to compensate for this lack of gallery in a variety of ways. One is working very hard on documentation so that at least the collections, even if you can't see them, all of them in person, you wouldn't never be able to see all of them in person anyway, but the information in the database is accurate, and so I have edited in my 13 years at the BM probably 11 to 12,000 records, which is considered quite substantial. You can also, of course, ask to see things. If you come to London, you can ask to see things in the Asia Study Room. But then I have tried to be very active in terms of exhibitions. So the Burma to Myanmar show was actually my 4th exhibition at the museum. And last week I was in Bangkok talking to various Thai entities about possibly doing a traveling exhibition from the British Museum's Thai collection to different places. So I'm trying to just be very active and keep Southeast Asia in the museum's eye. Before COVID, I was close to getting what I called a pop-up permanent gallery, but then COVID came, and of course the cost of living crisis, so then that was the end of that. But right now, with our new director, we are embarking on a big project where we're going to renovate the whole museum. And one of the things I want to do is, obviously we have rather a kind of a fusty reputation. So one of the things I want to do is try using spaces experimentally in the process of this renovation. So while we're closing part of the museum, they want to open up some other galleries and to start doing, you try something for a year. If that doesn't work, well, you try something else in another year. And I'm working very hard to make sure that Southeast Asia is given plenty of time in these pop-up spaces over the course of the next decade. What I'm also hoping is that we can, generate, as I said, these touring exhibitions. So we're trying hard. And then again, lots of publications. I've done the Southeast Asia History and Objects book recently, which then gives people a sense of what's available and get researchers to come and so forth. So I could keep going on, but maybe there's some other questions. But yes, I'm trying as hard as I can, and I think shortly there will be some things, much more available than currently is.
Thank you, Alex. Is there another question from the audience?
I've overwhelmed everybody.
Someone, maybe the lady in the back. Oh, there's one lady in the back. And then Nor last.
Hello, thank you for your fascinating presentation. I'm wondering, in the example you shared of the puppet with you said poor quality gold, what made that poor quality? At least in the image that you showed from this distance, I couldn't quite tell, so I'm curious to learn more about that. Thank you.
Yes, so I'm sorry. I did realize afterwards that it's not very clear, but the gold and the paint should be very, very precise, and what you find on the puppets is actually the gold leaf goes out of line. It's like you've colored it in rather sloppily, and there are bits that you have this edge, you have a dotted edge, for example, and then you'll get the gold leaf out over that, which it absolutely shouldn't. So it does look, to an untrained eye, like it's done very nicely, but actually it isn't. The other thing that also happens is that the gold leaf is applied, and then sometimes it covers the carving. So obviously, it's a shadow puppet. You want the light to be able to shine through it, and if it's covered in gold leaf, you can still see that the carving is there, but no light would have gone through. And of course, as I said, a decent puppeteer would not have accepted that. And the same with the paint. It'll be quite, parts of it will be finely done. So obviously these are puppets that have been redone for collection, because then some of the painting will be lovely, and then you get these swaths of just plain red, and again, very sloppily applied, or they'll put on some motifs that are just huge when the other painting on the puppets is incredibly tiny and very fine. So it's this combination of coarse and fine, and then also actually the writing on the feet. So somebody has come along and written in just sort of a big sloppy hand particularly on the Chiribon puppets, identifying the characters in Roman script. But then the Javanese writing is actually very neat and fine, and you find that mostly on the central Javanese puppets. So there are lots of little clues like that. And again, until I started this project, I had no idea either. And now I'm like, oh, that's really sloppily done. When once upon a time I'd have been like, oh, it's amazing. So yes.
So we have time for just one last question. Is there some?
Maybe.
Sure. Could the microphone be?
Earlier when you talked about certain objects being made for raffles, it felt like you were edging towards the issue of repatriation, and I was surprised you didn't talk about that. So, are there any objects here which you discovered which do seem to have been looted rather than purchased? And what are the debates about repatriation over those?
So, I mean, there hasn't been any discussion nobody has called for the repatriation of any of the puppets or any of the Raffles collection at all. We haven't had any requests. As I said, I think we have identified only 4 puppets that likely came from the Jogjakarta court. So that's out of 363. So, yeah, it hasn't been an issue. Many of these seem to have either been gifts or purchases. Unfortunately, of course, Raffles' papers sank and when he left Sumatra in 1824, so we don't know if he kept a record of where he acquired these things, and we will never know. So it's a matter of looking at these puppets in detail. And I think the important thing here is very much about collaboration. Objects can't simply be reduced to being pawns in a political movement. Obviously, if things were clearly looted, then that's for discussion. But I think what's important now is that we work together and we look at these objects as the complex entities that they are.
Thank you, Alex. So Noah had one last question, so I thought we could take this question and close today's session after. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandra, for your insightful talk. Just wondering, in the 1700s, with the sacking of Ayutthaya and Thai people resettling in Burma, do you observe there are other Thai forms adopted in other art forms in Burma, like metalwork?
So I haven't explored metalwork, and there really isn't that much left from that late 18th, early 19th century. The problem with silver, particularly, for example, or gold, is that it's just, in times of difficulty, it just gets melted down and remade. And people would bring actually silver objects in to have something new made, because who wants something old? Maybe you want something new. So I don't know that we have enough material. Absolutely, I'm sure. And there's a big study being done by a man named Bryce Beamer, where he's looked at the impact of slave gathering, where people are scooped up and relocated on artistic production in Myanmar in great detail. So Bryce Beamer is his name. So he's finishing up his book. I think this week or next week. But his PhD was published back in his PhD was finished back in 2013. So he's definitely the person to look for more specific details like that. But I think on metalwork, no. But yes, I mean, there's a whole lot of impacts that were made by these Thai people who were resettled. I looked at the impact on wall paintings in an article that I published in 2011, I think it is. So I mean, there's plenty more to be done on this topic.
So thank you so much, Alexandra. We have now come to the end of today's talk. We hope you can join us again on 27th of February. We will have another speaker, Dr. Mark Rasaratnam, speak on the topic of first-generation Peranakan unions, Christianized Peranakan communities in early Singapore 1830s to 1880s. This talk will be held under the ACM Conversations series. We would really appreciate, thank you, Alex, if you could give us your feedback by scanning the QR code on the screen. It will help us improve the way we organize our lectures. We hope to see you back again for the next talk. Thank you so much again, Alexandra, for this amazing opportunity to deep dive into the objects in British Museum's holdings, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.